Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back, everybody. Lots of insight she gives us in the legal field. This is What's Law Got to Do with It? With our professional of the year, she is with a firm in New York City, a partner at Greenspoon, Marder, LLP. And her specialty is litigation in the area of construction and real estate. And we are going to look at that today, specifically one area that could affect all of us. God forbid, in the event of a disaster or some challenges. Carol Sigmond is with us again on the program. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, Steve. How are you?
Real good, real good. Till I heard some of the challenges coming to FEMA and money that is being taken away from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Big implications potentially, right? Tell us your thoughts.
Well, they're doing this 2 months before the beginning of the Atlantic hurricane season, which is a little troubling because, what's the plan for the Atlantic hurricane season? So that's the kind of the first big question. The more complicated question is, what policy is the Trump administration trying to pursue? Now, there has been criticism of FEMA over the years. For example, rebuilding houses in a flood zone. Maybe not the best idea. The perpetual rebuilding in areas that are prone to hurricane flooding, maybe not the best idea. On the other hand, it's been an essential tool for homeowners to get back on their feet after catastrophes. I mean, Andrew, Wilma, up here we had Sandy. FEMA does a lot. It also responds to other kinds of disasters. It has long been seen as something that the federal government has handled and organized as well as funded, so that the states can help each other. I mean, when we had that terrible situation after Sandy, I remember sitting on a bus and watching a long string of ambulances from Wisconsin and Michigan and Illinois making their way up Third Avenue from New York Hospital, from Langone to Mount Sinai, because Langone was losing its generators and Sinai had capacity. So, and then, we send firefighters and ambulances to other parts of the country, and FEMA facilitates that and helps to defray some of that expense. I mean, what are we if we don't help each other? What's the purpose of the federal government if we don't step in and help our neighbors, even if they're 1,000 miles away? They're still our fellow countrymen, and they're still, part of our world. So I'm a bit concerned about the possibility of closing down FEMA and what this is going to mean for housing.
Now, let's get some clarity for those of us not plugged into this. Is FEMA entirely going away, or most of it is being dismantled? What are you hearing?
Well, it's a little hard. I took a look this morning to see what the latest was. It seems that some of its functions they're attempting to reassign to other agencies. Not 100% sure where they're going. They might be going to Homeland Security. FEMA is another federally created, congressionally created independent agency. I'm not sure Congress will allow it to be closed down or even its functions transferred. That remains to be seen. I haven't seen a lawsuit filed yet. I would expect one would be filed at some point. So there seems to be a pattern in what the Trump administration is trying to do. They're trying to consolidate some of these independent agencies into the cabinet departments, with the idea that they can reduce staffing and reduce budget and maybe cut back on function. FEMA's functions are a little difficult to cut back on. I mean, think about, after Katrina, you had all those people in small boats that had to go out and rescue people who were trapped in their homes. I mean, if FEMA doesn't do that, who's going to do it? Who's going to organize it?
Sure. And it's challenging enough to get people to be dispatched. I have many of my friends are in the world of emergency services, whether they're EMTs, firefighters, whatever it might be. And the last hurricane down south, they couldn't get enough volunteers, couldn't get enough people. They were begging. And that's where, all them troops from our area, New York, we happen just to be in the same area, headed on down there. That's challenging in itself. But then funding for it, these people were volunteering. That you have to have funding for equipment, fuel, supplies, etc. Do you think it would be reasonable?
They've got to eat. They've got to be housed.
Yes, absolutely. And thank goodness, the goodwill nature of a lot of, fast food restaurants, they stepped it up and set up things in the parking lot to feed them in the, emergency situation. Do you think it would be reasonable if there needs to be cutbacks for FEMA, cut back on some of the other programs that are non-emergency related and just keep the war chest, if you will, retained for when disaster strikes?
FEMA doesn't really have much else. They do disaster planning. They do pre-disaster staging. They acquire stuff, generators, vehicles, prefabbed hospitals that they can put up when hospitals are flooded. They don't have, other than their planning function, there isn't a lot of other functions they're doing.
And I'm unaware. That's why I was even bringing that up, just to trim in the fat.
If you were going to look at FEMA's budget and you were going to look for a way to maybe make it more rational, you start to look at, should we continually rebuild on the coast? Should people in Florida move 300 feet back from high tide, let's say? Should we continue to rebuild in areas that are showing a propensity to be hit over and over again? Those homes that they built in Houston in a spillway, should they even have been built? And then, how do you can't rebuild them. You can't put them back in a spillway. I mean, it's designed as a floodplain. It's just a bad idea.
Right.
So a lot of the discussion that I've seen over the years has been, do we begin to restrict coastal building? And you've seen some of it in New Jersey. You have some of it in New York, where they either were saying don't build on the dunes, or you have to build on essentially houses on stilts so that they're not so flood prone. So maybe do you try to reduce the risk of homes being lost in these storms, or do you simply recognize climate change is real and pull some of the properties back from water's edge and say, no FEMA coverage here. FEMA's not coming in. We're only going to go so far.
Okay. All right. So I see this in a different light now. So it's FEMA really putting up their boundaries as to what areas they will attain to when there is an emergency. So, okay. All right.
Well, that's not the discussion going on right now. The discussion going on right now is kind of break it and see what happens. I'm saying that if you were trying to think it through and rationalize FEMA, you might start looking at some limitations.
Sure.
They wouldn't just be limitations on the coast. They may be, you say to California, you can't build this densely in the desert. It's too dangerous. It's not just the water, it's the fires as well.
I'm getting it, man, and I understand these are, we have a canvas, we have paint, and we're coming up with different, scenarios that might work. And that one, if cutbacks need to take place, maybe that's reasonable, because how can you protect something on a coast where even it's hard enough to get insurance for it. Now you're looking at protecting it from the government side in case something were to happen.
What about human life? I mean, people are in these homes. Sometimes they don't want to leave, and
Sure.
Sometimes it's dangerous. And then emergency service personnel are at risk to try to get them out. I'm not completely convinced that it's just about money and property. It's also about, people's lives and quality of life. And, not putting nursing homes in areas of risk and not putting hospitals in areas of risk, not putting schools in areas of risk. Just, do we need to really think about resiliency when we build things in the future?
Sure. And then you have those situations like last summer where a village in the middle of North Carolina, no one would ever think it would get tremendously flooded, and that's an understatement. To me, that's why we have FEMA. Situations like that, just you need quick response, you need quick funds. No one saw that coming.
Well, and you also need FEMA, which had, cell towers. I mean, they had prefab cell towers that they could move in. And I have a very dear friend, longtime dear friend, who lives in Brevard, North Carolina. So as the storm was coming, I said, we're going to lose you. I'm going to keep texting until I can find you. And then I was texting her, and FEMA put up a tower. She was able to get a text. And then she said, we need to know what roads are closed. So I found a North Carolina spreadsheet that had the closed roads in her areas, and I sent it to her. And I was sending her as much information as I could get her.
Wow.
The text, because all they had was the FEMA cell tower. They had no cell. I mean, it was just out. Everything was out.
Probably no
Fortunately,
internet,
FEMA
just
came
very
through
minimal.
but FEMA came through with water and food and, medical facilities. In Florida last year, they literally erected a tent hospital near Sarasota because they didn't the hospital was flooded. So it's yes, and it made a difference in people's lives. I mean, people were better off because FEMA came into North Carolina and helped people.
I can't see how we can exist without FEMA. I know, you got to save money. You and I got to save money. I get that. But there's just some things where you can't cut back. Talking about money, construction, housing, real estate is your legal expertise. We skimmed upon this, but never dug deeper into it, and it just seems to be coming around again. The rental prices are just through the roof pretty much everywhere in the country right now, and
Yes.
price fixing are words that are assigned to that. What's going on here?
Well, I think there are two things happening. The first thing is there's just a national housing shortage. There just hasn't been enough housing built. And
Sure.
one of the assumptions that the boomers would leave their homes and, younger generations would take them over hasn't been happening. They haven't been building enough affordable housing. And unfortunately, the Trump administration has pulled almost $1 billion out of rehabbing existing affordable housing, which could be further impactful. Whether there will be funding available from the federal government to help build low-income, affordable and low-income housing issues. So those are all funding issues on the supply side. AI has come into the rental world in the form of a publication called RealPage, which has been allowing landlords to share information about the rental market, rental availability, and rental pricing from their competitors. When this first broke in ProPublica, I want to say probably almost a year ago, the state attorney generals, a number of them, got very interested and filed one or more. I think there's one major antitrust action in which a number of state attorney generals are contesting whether or not RealPage is simply a mechanism for price fixing in rentals.
Wow.
And the federal government, the Biden administration, did an investigation, and the FTC had some concerns, and the Justice Department and the FTC under the Biden administration began to act. Now, a great deal of what RealPage was doing involved taking data and applying certain kinds of AI algorithms to it. The Biden administration viewed that as an antitrust abuse. And in the closing days of the Biden administration, they increased the sort of litigation attacks on these AI schemes. The Trump administration came in and they haven't dismissed any of these cases. They haven't really looked at them, but there's a shift in focus. So that the Biden people were looking less at how big are you and how big is the merger. They were looking more at how is this being used to affect the markets. And when AI was being used to impact the markets negatively, the Biden administration was using the antitrust power, the Sherman Act. The Trump administration is not as focused on the AI aspects of this. They are more focused on just big deals and looking at big deals. So it's a shift in emphasis. So it may be that the RealPage case does not have the kind of priority that it would have had in a follow-on to the Biden administration. That could be very harmful because the ProPublica articles and the complaints that were filed, the various public documents that have been filed are troubling and suggest there's an issue. And for those of us that are not PhDs in applied mathematics, and therefore sort of know these algorithms are out there, but I have no idea how they work. There is a website that kind of, or a LinkedIn group called the Algorithmic Justice League that does give you information on how some of this works, and there are people to answer your questions.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, let's go here. Let's assume price fixing and rental prices exist. It's a real thing. Personally, I think that's what's going on here, because you had, once there was people weren't buying homes because interest rates went up, and there was a lot of things. Prices went up of homes. Where I am, I live in Suffolk County, New York. Prices of homes in the past 6 months have gone up. I think it's 13 or 16%. The average price is $680,000. And in Nassau County, which is the county right next door to it, which is closer to the city, it was only like a 3% increase, and you're talking like $800,000 of an average price. We're not, yes, the Hamptons are attached to Suffolk County, but that's way far away. But anyway, let's assume rental prices are price fixed. What do we do there? What's going on? What can we do?
Well, either the state attorney generals or the Trump administration or both need to press this litigation against RealPage to stop the sharing of data and to control the algorithms that are allowing them to project what their competitors are doing.
Okay.
And re-level the playing field so that the landlords are not sort of sitting there going, okay, let's pull 5% of the housing off the market so we can force the prices up again.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That is just dirty. That's horrible. That's people's lives. That's everything right there.
There's probably nothing worse from an economic point of view than price fixing. It has such an insidious effect when it gets going. And if the ProPublica publications are right, it's going.
Yeah.
I'm kind of hoping that by keeping a public focus on it, it will encourage landlords not to participate and to withdraw and not use the use the real page information and, reset the market and re-level it. But it's going to be hard without, government action.
And you have a lot of rental companies swallowing up different complexes. So now it's creating almost a monopoly in some regards. There's only a few big rental companies out, at least in this area, and their rental prices are high, so everybody else's are up there at the same. You might get a one-off. Somebody's got half a house or something like that, but they look at the complex prices and say, well, hey, I'll go a little bit below that, and it's a horrible cycle.
Yeah, it is a tough cycle. Interestingly enough, at least when this story first broke, it was not as prevalent in the New York metropolitan area. It was we just didn't seem to have it. It could be because we just had such a constraint on the available housing market that they didn't need to do that. I mean, we just don't have enough housing. New York is clearly just needs housing.
Completely. As that, challenges in many other areas, metro areas around the country. This whole price fixing concept coming to light. When do you think that was approximately?
I want to say it was at least a year ago. Could be a little longer.
Okay.
And it was kind of bubbling along under Biden. I was kind of watching as, investigations were done, then lawsuits were started, then lawsuits were amended, then they were expanded. Then we had the change of administration. And I was curious to see if anything would happen. But now what we're seeing on the antitrust front is a shift in focus. It would be good if the Justice Department, put some attention on not just in this area, but anywhere that there's algorithmic price fixing that should be attacked.
How would that go? Would there be penalties imposed, or how would that? Yeah.
Yeah. There's two ways it can go. The Sherman Act is both civil and criminal. So people could go to jail. Usually if the court finds that there's been price fixing, then they will start a disgorgement proceeding. Frequently, the government gets the disgorged funds, and then it's usually too hard to return it to the various consumers. They're just too many. They've moved on. So, the funds might be used to, for housing loans to build other housing or, renovate or whatever the particular state or federal agency thinks is a good use of these public funds. But there is generally disgorgement, and it can be quite substantial because they can disgorge more than the amount that they obtained unfairly.
So in closing here with the price fixing on rentals, could there be a fund created, like when there's a class action lawsuit and you can log in, give your personal information, and prove that, yes, I was renting in the ABC complex. And
it's possible. That is possible.
Okay.
I don't know how. I haven't studied the cases closely enough to see what remedies. There was sort of general disgorgement remedies, but they haven't talked about whether they would try to return it. Some of this housing is student housing. They could go back to the universities and give them funds to subsidize students. There's a lot of different mechanisms for fixing it, including but not limited to trying to return money to people who actually overpaid.
I like the way you said that. It's so legalese, including but not limited to. I don't even know if you say that. Like it's
no,
programmed,
I don't. It's like
it's legalese. I think it's great. Yeah, you never hear
I'm
it.
Sorry.
No, not at all. This is what you do and very effectively. But when I hear certain terms, they stand out as if I'm reading a contract, an agreement, stipulation, whatever it might be. Somebody wants to reach you, Carol, for just picking your brain, maybe legal advice, legal situation, whatever it might be. How do they find you?
The best way to find me is carol.sigmond@gmlaw.com. And I do answer my emails. I read them and I answer them.
Thank you so much for being here. I feel like I am the smartest person in the room when we get done, and can share that with others. And it's just so much insight, important stuff that's going on that in this industry, in this category, you don't hear a lot about it. And I appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve. It was nice seeing you again.
You too. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.